So we're not gonna be like, all right, welcome to Bother the Father. We're here. We have at least one guest tonight. Maybe more might join us later. We'll have to see. Go. So open any questions, whatever you have. Feel free to start shooting.
Let me see. I have a lot. One of the things that, well, here, I want to ask you this while you're under oath.
Okay.
What is your preference? Father Mark or Father Madden?
I don't really have a preference. As long as you call me father, I'm okay with that. I just tell people, well, that depends too on the context. Like when I sometimes go to McIlhenny Mary to celebrate Mass, 'cause I grew up in that parish. People that know me there before I was ordained. I find it's very hard for them to remember to say father or whatever. And I don't call anyone out. So my thought is, this is what I usually tell people. If you receive the blood of the Father from me, call me Father. If you see a man of service, call me deacon. And if you see neither, call me Mark. Right? No, praise
And
God.
Stick to those three.
I mean, I'm good with those either way. Yeah, I mean, but as far as Father Mark, Father Man, I really have no problem with that.
Okay, because of course I grew up with Father Pepperling
Right.
and Miss Culberson.
What do you two? I mean, I don't get shifted until I was in high school or started like for the first name thing.
Yeah.
But okay, but I mean, I'm not really opposed either way.
Okay, because I really would like to call you what you prefer, because I have some bothering to do.
Okay.
I decided in March to just go deep into my religion.
Mhm.
It's been my religion for 70 years.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, there's some crazy stuff on there.
Yeah.
And I stay away from the Fatima Center.
Okay. All right.
I did an examination of conscience, and I felt like my conscience had been hit by a truck.
Mm-hmm.
With Father, I don't know what his name was.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But I mean, they are just super, super conservative. He said you can't go to your own child's wedding in a Protestant church.
And here's the thing, the problem with a lot of these videos and these, I want to say personalities, whether on YouTube and, I mean, here's now, I'm putting this on YouTube too, but like, I'm primarily a parish priest.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to, okay, let's put it this way, when it comes to issues of morality, that's very objective. So in other words, if I see somebody robbing a bank, I can say that's wrong, right? I don't even know anything else. So if I know that person is taking something that's belonged to them, and that's another assumption too you have to make in that scenario, I would say, well, that's wrong, right? The same way if someone if I was in a classroom and someone took a pen off my desk, started using the pen, that would be wrong too. If I were to see somebody that were stabbing someone to death, objectively, I can say, well, that doesn't seem right, right? Now when we understand when it comes to morality, there are three aspects of that. There is the object, the thing that's being done, right? Whatever the actual purpose is. There is the circumstances, and there's the intention. So the objective we can observe objectively, right? We can say, well, from outside of the situation, that seems wrong. Mm-hmm. Intention is more internal to the person, so we can't necessarily judge that all the time. And the circumstances typically can be observed too, although those aren't always completely known by people that are not part of the actual action. Mm-hmm. All three of those need to be good for it to be a moral action. And only one of those has to be wrong for it to be an immoral action. So for instance, where that kind of comes into play, let's say that I am in my home and somebody breaks in at night, late at night. I hear glass breaking, and there's a level of fear that resides inside me. And maybe I have a weapon of my own in my house, and I grab my weapon, whatever that may be, and I go downstairs to see what's going on. And the process of doing that, I am startled and I fire my weapon or use my weapon against someone who's there, end up taking their life. Okay. Now, objectively, taking a life is wrong. But in that particular instance, we wouldn't say morally that person took a life because that person didn't intend to take a life. And the way the circumstance that person was in, they were really trying to defend their own life for the life of their family. And objectively, we say that, well, that's the object. Because any rational person who are in the same circumstances would do the same, right? But objectively, we would say that's not taking a life, I'm defending my life. And because I'm in a circumstance where I don't know what's going on, I don't know the intention of the other person, my intention is not to take life, but I might react if someone if I were startled or something happened. That would be something moral to do, to defend yourself and your life in your own home. That's different than, okay, I hear a glass breaking downstairs, like, oh boy, and I grab my gun, and I run down there, start shooting whatever I can find, right?
Yeah.
That's much different in kind than the
Yeah.
previous scenario, right? So I say that because morality is objective. We can actually observe and kind of learn these things and determine those, make those judgments. Sin is subjective. So in other words, what that would mean is if I rob a bank, the only one to actually judge if that's a sin for me is God and my own conscience. Right? Because let's maybe go back to this morality situation. If I see someone robbing a bank, or let's even make it different. Let's say it's robbing a store. Schnucks over there in Hampton Village. Let's say a man goes in there and robs a loaf of bread, takes a loaf of bread off or let's say he falls on the floor, he takes that loaf of bread and he just walks out with it. No one says anything to him, he just walks out. Well, let's say the circumstances are such that man has a wife and children, and he's lost his job, and he has no other ways of providing for them. And he was going in there to look for a job, but instead he decided to take a loaf of bread. We can say that's still wrong because if you didn't exhaust all your options, that was a wrong thing to do. That was right. You could have done other things more rationally, like you asking for a job and providing for your family that way. But you made that choice not to do that. If that were me, I would say for me that's a sin because I should know better. I can't say it'd be a sin for anyone else. Because that has a good reason to take the bread.
Hungry kid.
Right. But also we could say morally that's not right. But sinfully, I can't say that's a sin for him. Maybe he didn't know there was any other options. So that's why when you see these things were put out there, what the point of examination of conscience, the mission of the church is to help you to understand that and provide that. Well, here's some grave matter you should consider in your own sinfulness.
Well, I was getting out, I got out a pad of paper and I was looking for my favorite pen when he started. And he started with First Commandment. I thought, oh, I can find my pen. I had like 12 things
right
on the First Commandment I never heard of. One of them was Spiritism. Well, my dad died when I was 11, and I cannot tell you how long, but it had to be a decade. I begged him to come back. And I knew he couldn't,
right.
And I still asked him to. Well, that's apparently Spiritism. Well, when you lose your dad, I think you can skate on that one.
Well, I think it this way. You were 11.
Exactly.
So, like you said, maybe also another clarification comes to sinfulness. We have venial and mortal, and mortal sin, especially, there's a level of deliberation and consent that's necessary to say it's mortal or not.
Yeah.
So, in other words, you have to understand what you're doing is wrong.
Well, yeah, and I never heard of that.
Exactly.
And, but I could get myself, upset enough in my 20s because I just never could understand it. He knew what agony there was in that household. He died at the end. He died during a strike. There were no benefits. It was, and I was 11.
Yeah.
I was the oldest of 5.
Yeah.
The baby was 11 months.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, but I had never even heard. Now, the Ouija board, I never knew that was a problem.
Mhm.
I think our neighbors had one. And when we would try it, we would get in a big fight about who
Sure.
was moving it.
Right, right,
You're
right,
moving
right,
it.
yeah,
You're doing it on
Yeah.
purpose.
yeah,
So we never got much out of that, but my neighbor, who's 81, had an experience with it
yeah.
in her 20s.
Mhm.
It came up with a number. I
Mhm.
can't remember the story exactly. She and her friend, they thought, well, what is that to us? Well, then they're driving along and this car, I think, gets in front of them and crashes. That was the license plate.
Mhm. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, so I think.
that was weird.
So these things that, so practically, so ultimately, right, just to clarify, the first commandment is putting anything else other than God in the place of God, right?
Yeah.
So what does that mean practically? Well, anytime we sin, we do that,
Mhm.
technically, right?
Yeah.
But also more practically speaking, yeah, these things we call like divination, right?
Mhm.
And spiritualism is a form of divination, like doing
Mhm.
seances, right? What it is saying, I'm putting my faith in this action rather than in God.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to things like Ouija boards, horoscopes, mediums, the issue there is not, well, okay, am I doing these things and maybe I'm getting entertainment value out of it?
Yeah.
Maybe that could be the case. What the church really understands about that though is that, well, we don't know for sure what could be coming through in those things.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's saying that actually could be a valid way of actually communicating with spirits, but the problem is you don't know which spirits you're talking to.
Well, and she, well, it's spooked them,
Yeah.
but I don't know if it could have been warning them because, it's happened so fast.
Mhm.
But like I said, when we would try it, we just argued about, because if it moved, we just insisted
Right.
the other one did it
Right,
on
right.
purpose.
But the issue there, morally speaking, is because we don't know, it's best just to stay away from it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so engaging that willfully and saying, well, you know what, I don't care what the church says or what everybody else says, I want to talk to dad, or I want to do something else. That's where the problem would lie, because you don't know if you're talking to dad.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, why in 12 years, there's so much that I'm hearing that we didn't learn.
Well, yeah, I think, well, so part of that could be generational. So there was kind of historically, there was sort of a rejuvenation of spiritualism in like the 1920s, 1930s.
Yeah.
So there's more kind of development, and the church always, and this is a fair critique, the church is usually kind of slow bringing those up. Like for instance, also was really big in the 20s and 30s was when you bury someone, you would cremate them. Well, when that was first started, that came about in the 1920s and 30s. That was being done in direct opposition of the church's teaching of the resurrection of the body. And so the church's position was, well, wait a minute, that's not right. If you're going to cremate yourself with this understanding, then we can't have a Catholic funeral, and we couldn't bury you, and we can't do these things because you're opposing the church's teaching. And a lot of that came down to the intention. And it kind of same thing when there was kind of this development of spiritualism. Sometimes the approach is, well, maybe we don't want to bring attention to it so it doesn't get too much worse. Mm-hmm. But also, well, people, if we're doing our job right and saying that God should be first in your life, that should flow rationally into that, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes that connection is always made with people. And also, sometimes you have to consider, too, the motive of the receiver. So, for instance, I don't know, when you were first talking to me, my parents talked to me about that when I was really young. We had I know we had a children's Bible, went through like.
Well, I started kindergarten I was born in 52, right. So right. 57, 58.
But to be fair, but I also say, but to be fair in those instances, maybe the next time you talk about the commandments, maybe in second grade in preparation for first confession.
I think I was in first grade.
Maybe, right. And so you're 6 or 7. So how much you're really receiving? And also, I would imagine, I imagine you would probably had nuns at the time.
Oh, all nuns. We had one
right.
lay teacher.
Right. And I'd imagine they didn't probably talk much about that stuff because the assumption is, well, 6-year-olds, you're probably not doing that anyway. So why address it?
Well, and when I went back to church, I realized I had not made one single valid confession. I
Well,
had,
well, okay, well, you have to clarify that a little. What do you mean by
well,
that?
well, I understand that if you don't put it all out there, didn't work and nothing works after.
Let's be clear about this. Okay, so if you're saying, let's say in general, if someone came to confession and the trick is willfully, right?
Mhm,
Willfully neglected to say something in the confessional, let's say.
mhm.
Not because they didn't know it was a sin, not because they just forgot it. And even to some extent, what canon law talks about is maybe someone felt compelled not to because they feared retribution or something else.
Well, yeah, I had my formula,
Yeah.
and I bet you
Most a lot of people
hear the
do.
same
Yeah,
with the little kids.
sure, right.
Well, I felt comfortable saying I lied, and I felt comfortable saying that I was mean to my sister because
Right. Yeah.
anybody who knew her would be mean to
Sure.
her. But if I copied an answer off of Mary Jo's paper,
Mhm.
I wasn't gonna risk that priest flying out of there,
Yeah.
throwing me out of the church and throwing me out of the school.
Right, right.
I
So
kept that to myself,
well-
and my penance was, it was wrong. The answer I got from her was
Oh,
always wrong.
well, all right.
So
Well,
I did have penance.
So that's the thing though too, and that there could be a rational. The canon law talks about rational fear,
Uh-huh,
right? Now, as a 6 or 7 year old, or even 8, 9, 10 year old,
uh-huh,
if you don't have a full understanding what the sacrament is, and you're thinking, oh man, let me tell my parents what she did, that is a rational fear.
uh-huh.
Now, as we grow and mature and have a better understanding, which hopefully that happens, but we see today that doesn't. Most people have maybe an 8th grade spiritual mentality
Mm.
because they don't strive to learn more about the faith after they graduate.
But it's also, well, you know, hard.
Granted.
It's hard.
So what I would argue that I wouldn't say it's invalid. I think that there could have been a rational fear which kept you from doing that. But as we grow and mature,
Yeah.
of course. But then again, we start looking at, well, did I forget that?
Well,
in which case, then your sin will still be forgiven.
after I did this general confession with Father Shaughnessy.
Good, yeah.
And when I got there, you said people from the parish call you Mark. When I got there, I'm sitting with Sister Rosemary, waiting for him. And I told her, I said, I remember the day he was born.
Mhm.
And when I saw Joe, his dad,
Mhm.
out of the blue, I hadn't seen him in years and years, ran into him at Panera's. I was looking for a priest,
Mhm.
and I'm hearing in my brother's voice from heaven above saying, talk to a Jesuit, Chris, talk to a Jesuit. And it came to me, and I actually said out loud to myself, baby Danny.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Because I knew Danny
sure.
and Mike
Yeah,
Banas when they were kids.
sure, right, yeah.
Mike Banas and his brothers jacked my MG midget up when I was babysitting for them and almost rolled it over. So I had something on him, but he's gone now.
Right, yes, yeah.
But I just thought I better start. But as soon as I walked out of there, I thought of something, and I've thought of something every week ever since. In fact, I might have even said that to you in the confessional.
And
I
here,
keep thinking
yeah.
of new stuff.
And here's the thing about it. I mean, there's something you forgot, and it's not that you withheld it, you purposely withheld it, you forgot. That's still forgiven. Now, there is a level though of freedom in bringing that up in the confessional if you forgot and came there next time you come. That's okay to do, but it's not really necessary.
Oh, really? Well, my problem, and I identified it because I'm all about Saint Faustina now, and I have her book that I water damaged, so now I own it. Trust, that's the name.
Yeah.
And in thinking about this, because I thought about it for a couple of weeks, this confession, it occurred to me that a lot of my sins were lack of trust.
Yeah.
I didn't trust. I was a very shy little girl. I didn't trust the confessional. I didn't trust my own gifts,
Sure.
like copying. I never had any problem with my grades,
Yeah.
but I could worry
Yeah.
if I saw somebody who's thought something different.
Yeah.
So, I just thought I should start there. And, but I do keep thinking of things, and so I confess them just with the encouragement that there is grace.
Yeah, of course,
in
right, yeah.
confessing
And
them.
and really, I mean, and I think that's what we have to kind of understand is that your sins are forgiven if you forget them. But also there's a level of freedom in confessing the sins openly that you're free from them too, right? And so you don't necessarily have to, but it's good if you do, right? That's okay to do,
Good.
but not
Okay.
really necessary to do if you already have been forgiven of your sins.
Okay.
before that, yeah.
Well, I told Father Dan, I said, well, I don't remember what I was gonna say, but something happened to a family member who I had not seen. Well, he died, and he was in prison, and he's somebody I grew up with, so I decided that I was gonna pray his sort of behind into heaven. This is what I heard from, do you know of some of these priests? Father Chris Alar.
Yeah, I've heard the name, yeah.
He's with the Immaculate Conception, something, but it's the home of Sister Faustina, and I don't know the whole name. He said, and he said it more than once, that any prayers that are said for even generations before are available at first judgment.
Yeah, you mean generations preceding, yeah.
So if I'm praying for my dad
Right.
died 59 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
He has those prayers available to him 59 years ago.
Yeah, actually, Padre Pio was a great champion of that.
Yeah.
He used to say that, my prayers, I think it was, there was a story about someone came to him for spiritual direction. They said that they were distraught because, I can't remember, if it was like a spouse or family member committed suicide. And he was like, well, pray for them. And the well, Father, why should I pray for them if they commit suicide? Obviously they're in hell. And what he was trying to show is, well, God's mercy endures, and that your prayers do have an effect because God is outside time and space. And so our prayers do have a efficacious effect, even in the past, because they apply, right?
Well, then we have the situation of the Gregorian Mass.
Okay.
Where you say, well, you have to have a priest say, and when I asked somebody about it, they said, well, you're gonna have to get seminarian, because priests don't have 30 days to dedicate to praying for one person. And I know the story. It had to do with Pope Gregory giving somebody, And
I'm not familiar. What do you mean by the glory?
Okay. Well, apparently a monk had gold or money of some sort that he brought into the monastery.
Okay, all right. Okay,
big note.
Yeah.
And he confessed this to his buddy, his best friend there, who told Gregory. And Gregory said he was dying, cancer. He said, you're not going to have any care anymore. You're going to be buried in the garbage dump. So that's what they did.
So Hildegard, before you put Gregory talk about, he told this to this monk.
All I know is the name Gregory, so I guess so.
Yeah.
So this was this guy's punishment.
Okay.
So he wasn't buried in the cemetery; he was buried in the garbage.
Okay.
Well, then he thought, maybe that was a little harsh. And he told that monk, I guess, get him out of the garbage, I don't know. But he said, pray for him 30 masses in a row.
Okay.
And at the end of those 30 days, the guy with the garbage on him comes back and says, I've just been released from purgatory.
Like in a vision, he came back into this, or in a dream,
No, he really came back.
like he was resurrected?
His spirit came back.
Okay, all right.
Come on.
Okay, well, I'm just, we want to be clear what we're talking about. So it's always, clarity is always.
So the Gregorian Mass has to do with having masses for 30 days. Well, why did this guy spend 30 days in purgatory if all of those 30 days of masses were available at first judgment?
Yeah, so part of that is understanding though what purgatory is. So purgatory is not like a waiting room. It's not like it's like you're waiting there to go to heaven or hell. Anyone in purgatory is destined for heaven. That's why I just had a conversation today with a candidate for our RCA about this too. And we have to understand that our sin does have an effect temporally, right? So not only do we offend God when we sin, we offend others, right? And so part of that is our attachment to that sin we call temporal punishment. And so that still needs to be given. So justice still has to be done, right? And when I sin, I still have to give justice to the people I've offended by my sin. Now we call that a penance, right? And hopefully we're going to die in that state of attachment so that we don't have to go through purgatory. But most of us, a huge majority of us, probably will, right? Because we all have earthly attachment in some way.
That brings me to my next question.
Great.
Plenary indulgences.
Yeah, great.
There's Father Chris Alar, who says things like, well, I'm going to be the one who turns out the lights in purgatory. I'm a terrible sinner. Well, he says he earns a plenary indulgence every day, and the last one of the month he keeps for himself.
Okay. Good for him.
Yeah. Well, if I can do that, because, to be honest, at my age, the great sins don't come around too fast anymore.
Okay, good. Yeah. Right.
And so I don't even know 365 people that I could get into heaven.
You probably could if you really think about it.
Well, I do have a long list.
Yeah, I mean,
like pray for, but this Gregorian Mass thing, if that was going to get him directly into heaven, he had to wait 30 days. Now, another thing was it Padre Pio who said somebody asked for prayers, somebody dying.
Yeah.
And he waited till the next morning.
Right.
And the guy comes to him and says, why did you leave me? In purgatory for 1 year.
Right. Again, we have to kind of look at these like, okay, what is time really in purgatory if it's outside time and space? So in that respect, but does the effect of, let's say, 30 years of purgation that come down on that person, even if it's instantaneous, do you still feel the effect of it? Maybe, right? The problem with these discussions, we don't really know exactly what it's like in purgatory, like what that actually means. And there's actually a great breadth of understanding of what that could possibly be. So many saints, even Saint Faustina and others, have talked about their vision of purgatory as being this fire and burning away these things that we've had attachments to, and that takes time and there's a lot of suffering. Maybe.
But you don't have a body.
True, but that doesn't mean that you don't have feelings or effects, right? I mean,
I think of fire as burning.
It is bodily, but there could be a burning of the soul, right? A burning of the mind that could have an effect on you, right? That's a part of your soul. So maybe you still kind of have the feeling, the sensation of burning, even though you don't have a body. Or maybe you do. Because when we talk about the resurrection of the body,
here you can borrow it for a while.
No, what I'm saying is, we understand, we profess as church that there's a resurrection of the body, okay, and that would happen at the second coming, right, of Jesus. But if we're in a state outside of time and space, the coming of Jesus is happening, has already happened, and will happen. So in other words, who's to say that you don't actually, your glorified body does reunite with you in heaven instantaneously, or in purgatory instantaneously, and you actually do feel those things. We don't know, right? So,
We don't
so
know.
it's very hard to kind of make these terminations because you have everything from, yeah, you basically get purged away all these things to, well, some people just talk about purgatory being kind of akin to the parable of the prodigal son. That purgatory is like this movement of the father towards the person, and the time it takes the father to run to you as the prodigal son is that time of anticipation purgatory. I don't know. We don't know for sure.
Well, I have a friend who is in the RCIA and was going through a pretty hard time. You know her. And I went back to her the day of that gospel. And I just put my arms around her and I said, that's me, that's you.
Yeah.
He is coming for us.
Right.
And so we had a little cry.
Yeah.
But what else did I have? Did you have some questions?
No, go ahead. You got time.
So I think when we're talking about the indulgences, we have to understand
Yeah.
that this kind of meant in whatever this is to kind of remit our temporal punishments so that we can be perfected and be detached from things so we can actually choose God fully. So, but anyone in purgatory is going there, right? So
now I'm talking, we're evangelizing the heck out of each other. This young fellow at Panera, he works at Panera.
Okay, yeah.
And
I think we talked about this guy before, but yeah.
well, I asked you if I could bring him, and then I thought he's gonna be,
shocked.
No, he's gonna be a nuisance.
Oh, I don't mind
Because he doesn't believe in, well, his answer is always, well, how do you know that? How can you prove that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't mind that.
And you know what I told him today? Weren't you the one who said that Jesus' baptism in the Jordan?
Yeah. But yesterday, what was it, Monday? Yeah, Monday.
Made all water holy.
Yeah.
Well, somebody in the rosary group today said, well, how can we have holy water then?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. Yeah. Because, well, it's holy water.
Water.
Well, no, it's a sacramental. But see, that's why we can say that any water can be used in the sacrament of baptism. It doesn't have to be specifically water, but particular water we bless to actually help us to receive a deeper grace in the sacraments, right? That's what perfect sacramental is. So when I bless myself with holy water, it's not that doesn't actually give me grace. What it does is actually help me to receive that grace of the sacraments in a deeper way.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And he just can't wrap his head around the perpetual virginity of Mary. And
it's amazing how I just had the conversation. Yeah. Right.
What's it to you?
The water was what really mattered, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he listens to this guy who is about finding truth. Well, he said to me the other day, he says, now what about the veneration of icons? I said, I've told you, we don't do that. Never did, never will.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, we do have a veneration to icons, but we don't worship them. Let's be clear about that.
But the icons are representative.
Yes.
I said, if you have a picture of your grandparents on your mantle that remind you of all of their love and caring, that's what a painting means.
We should honor the person depicted.
Right.
Right.
And so this guy is super duper intelligent, starts out, he has researched it for weeks. And this is why you should not be Catholic. And he's going back to Irene and Constantinople. Well, this guy's parents were Catholic and they left the church. And I said, well, ask your parents if they probably squirreled away like all of us did, your Baltimore Catechism.
Right.
And it says right in there, you learn that when you're 6. You don't need to know what happened in Constantinople.
True. Yeah.
I said, I do admit they never told us that, and they never mentioned Queen Irene. But this guy's got is like 115 minutes on it. I listened to 4. Then I wrote him 2 paragraphs, and my final was, what does this guy,
Yeah,
why is he spending all of his brilliance
right,
on banning the Catholic Church
Yeah.
instead of targeting agnostics?
right, yeah.
To get them
right,
to be Christians.
right.
Anyway. But anything that is, I guess he follows the idea of sola scriptura, obviously.
Okay, yeah,
that-
right, yeah,
But I did give him the chalk,
okay,
and I said, now, if you don't want it, don't take it.
right,
If you don't use it, or if you don't use it all, I said, take it to your parents' house too.
yeah,
I said, you need to bury it.
yeah,
Or bring it back to me.
yeah, fair,
He says, well, what if I just throw it away? I said, well, then you have broken trust with me.
yeah, right,
Speaking of blessing things, there is a man who I run into at Panera.
Mhm.
He is under the care of places for people who bring him, he says, 15 mental health pills a day.
Gotcha. Mhm.
And he is extremely paranoid.
Mhm.
And he came to you to confession a while back, a few
Okay.
months ago. He
Sure.
Well, he told me, he said, he says, did you go to mass today? I said, yeah. He said, was it Father Mark? I said, well, how do you know Father Mark? Well, that's when he told me.
Okay,
And he gets a phrase and he repeats it, and it's always, somebody broke in and stole his dirty laundry. And so I said, why don't you use the patches for stop cigarette smoking? Because you stopped drinking, you told me.
Mm.
So you could stop smoking. Well, it calms me down. I said, well, why don't you pray? I said, just saying Jesus' name or Mary's name is a prayer.
Mhm.
Or add, I love you, I
Mhm.
trust you, help me.
Mhm.
He says, well, I need a rosary. Well, Helen, who always says pocket full of rosaries, gave me, I said I need it, he's gonna lose it. So I said, is it blessed? Yeah, it's blessed. Well, can I give it to him? Because he might trade it for a couple packs of cigarettes. Can it have like a provisional blessing as long as he holds on to it? I don't,
Well,
I
here's
don't
the
wanna be too scrupulous
even
about
if
this.
even if he does that, okay, as long as it's being used. I mean, that's okay. I mean, it's okay. And so we also, I think we have to also kind of understand that when we bless something, that doesn't become a magical talisman. The blessing doesn't apply to the thing; it applies to the person using the thing.
Okay, good.
Right. So that's all we have to be. We also be very aware of that.
I've told him, but then his social worker told me, I don't know if Jerry sells everything. He loses everything.
Okay.
Well, he did tell me that they furnished an apartment for him and they gave him a television, but it didn't work. I said, they gave you a television and already doesn't work? He said, well, I sold
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there have to be, I mean, I guess somewhat, yeah, so selling blessed items is a little different than giving them away or trading them. In some
trading
ways.
them for cigarettes.
Right, so I
Everything's
mean,
about cigarettes.
okay, but I mean, if you was going to sell it, I might ask the reason, well, why would you do that? And also, who would really buy it? You can get a rosary anyway.
Somebody at Huck's
Okay,
is
well,
gonna take something off of him,
Okay.
whatever he's got. But anyway,
yeah,
I just didn't want to offend, but I want him to have a rosary.
I don't
He
think it'd be
grew
right,
up
yeah.
Catholic.
Mhm.
And there's another man who is, slow, very, very slow. And he'd like to go to mass. I said, well, Joe, you'd have to go to confession. That would be a mess. But he said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, well, I'll take you to mass, but you shouldn't go to communion.
Well, that also, again, that has to be subjective, right? So in other words, does he? I don't know. Does he have to go to confession or not? I don't know. I mean, so in other words, so people under certain circumstances, like invalids.
Yeah.
Well, if they can't get to confession and can't get to mass, the obligation is not there for them,
right.
right? So we have to be very aware of that. So I would never tell anyone go to confession. Like for instance, like for like couples that are coming to me for marriage prep, right? When you come to our last session, right before like they're getting ready for the wedding, I invite them. I say, look, if it's been a while, maybe it's a good idea just to go. But I don't say, hey, if you don't go, I'm not going to witness your marriage, because I don't have that. I can't do that. I can't force or compel anyone to go to marriage, to go to confession or to mass.
Yeah, but I can't.
You might be able to. The question is though, should you? Because again, because the problem there would be I'm implying that you're a sinner. I don't know if you've committed. I don't know that. So that's where the matter of conscience and free will comes into play. That's why the conscience will tell us if
So
we're
I should
sinners.
just mind my own business.
I would just say, look, if you want to go to mass, I'll bring it.
Yeah.
Right? It's up to you, right?
Yeah. These people need comfort. In fact, Jerry can get around.
Yeah.
And I said, you live near a church. Why don't you get to know some people there and ask if you can, sweep up a little bit or something.
Well, and even that respect too. I mean, even if someone is struggling, especially with mental illness, their culpability is incredibly reduced because of that too. Right. And so that's another thing to keep in mind when it comes to these things. So I mean, I think that's a good suggestion. Like, hey, if you live around church, why don't you meet some people and part of the community? That's good.
Well, when I have my mother's prayer book, which I'm sure she had probably at least since she got married in 50. And it seems to concentrate a lot on indulgences.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it has a list of them, saying Mary, 300 days.
Yeah, right, yeah.
What the heck is that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I thought I can be the saint who emptied purgatory. How many times could I do that? Well, then it has a word at the bottom, ROC, R-O-C something. So I looked that up. Well, that's the indulgence book. Yeah. And they tossed it.
Well, so yeah, that was actually, so the idea behind indulgences, and this really is not, I mean, it's really just penance in general. Yeah. And this goes in like somewhat of the history of the sacrament. We're told by Jesus specifically, go and confess your sins, right? And do that. So that's why we have the sacrament. He gave that authority to his priest after he's resurrected, after the Last Supper, when he appeared to his apostles, his disciples, after his resurrection, said, he breathed on them, said, receive the Holy Spirit, whose sins you retain are retained, whose sins you remit are remitted. So by doing that, he's given his priests and bishops the authority to do that. So from that point on, confession was actually public for a while. Oh. It was actually a public confession, and so you'd be absolved there in the midst of the sacrament. Good. But then they quickly realized, like, there's some sins here that probably are kind of reduced, can bring scandal and also maybe reduce the character in somebody's eyes. So they're starting to be more private, right? And that was happened very quick in the early.
I bet. How many people in the audience would say, "Hey, don't forget that."
Right. But even then, even after that, there were certain sins that have been like, well, they call them the big three. So it was murder, it was theft, and it was sins against chastity or adultery. So if you committed one of those sins, I mean, people may not know exactly what sin that was you committed, but you would have to be separated from the community for a particular amount of time. Typically, they have what they call the Mass of the Penitents, and the penitents basically they would be there for the liturgy of the Lord, but then they would have to leave. They would stay outside and beg for alms for the church and for the poor. And so, if you were to come to Mass and you saw these penitents, they committed at least one of those three. You didn't necessarily know which one, but you knew, like, okay, they were at least one of them. And that went on for about 5 or 6 centuries. And then, in about the 7th or 8th century, what happened was these Irish monks started to come up with, there was more private penances still, and they said, you know what, maybe we should start coming with some penances that kind of fit some of the crimes that are being committed. And so these Irish monks just started writing these tomes of different sins. If you confess them, this would be the penance that would subside, and with them, certain temporal punishments would be remitted because of that. Okay. And so for again another 1,000 years or so, that was kind of being used. It was like, well, if you lied to somebody, okay, well, That should be 3 Hail Marys. That should give you 400 days off of purgatory.
Oh,
Great, see you later. So as the church developed and understood the sacrament in a deeper way, that the mass of the penitents went away, right? Because it was decided, well, this seems still a little more whatever. But then you had these big books of penances that would give to somebody based on the sins they confessed. And to the point where, for a while there, absolution was denied until the penance was actually satisfied. Now that also was a lack of understanding, right? Because we understood the absolution gave the person, took away their, reconciled with God. But the penance was not part of that. But for a while there, that's what happened. If you came to me from confession and said, well, Father, I said the Lord's name 3 times and I lied 4 times and I cheated on my spouse once. Okay, well, let's see here. Based on this book, you got to do 3 Hail Marys. And oh, by the way, how much money do you have? Well, I got somewhat. Okay, I think you have to go on crusade then, and you go on crusade and come back, and then I'll absolve you. Thank God that changed, right? After Trent, Trent really did that. But that idea of those penances still retained even after Trent. And it really wasn't until about the 19th century where it was like, well, wait a minute here. We're trying to look at these new understanding of like purgatory and what these mean. Okay, well, if God is outside time and space, this doesn't really make much sense.
yeah.
How are we supposed to judge how many days?
Yeah, what's a day?
What's a day in purgatory? And so that kind of got remitted over time, right? And it wasn't necessarily like suppressed, but it wasn't necessarily used either. Right. So in other words, if I got that big book of penance, I start using those, they'll still be valid, you'll still be remitted of your temporal punishment. But would it be applicable and accurate? And really would be how burdensome would it be on somebody in those instances? That kind of raises scrupulosity, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't want to do that either.
Yeah.
Because the sacrament of confession is a sacrament of mercy. Right? God doesn't withhold his mercy, and we should not get penances that really don't fit what's actually being confessed.
Well, and in order to get a plenary indulgence every day, there's the phrase, you must have no attachment to sin.
Right.
Don't we all have an attachment?
Well, see, that's the big, so we're talking about a plenary indulgence, right? Meaning there remits all temporal punishment, right? Yeah, I mean, so like, maybe in the moment when you actually give the indulgence. So let's say I'm at mass. I went to confession before I went to mass. But even then, you have to go confession within 21 days of receiving the indulgence. But you still have to be free of any mortal sin, right?
Yeah.
You still have to receive the sacrament of the Eucharist and pray for the intention of the Pope. And that sticking point is I have to be detached from all temporal things.
Yeah.
That is now, is it possible? Sure. But for how long?
And well, you know this, I don't. This is my guess. Everybody confesses the same sins every week. So if you tend to gossip, you're still attached to it because you're gonna keep doing it.
Maybe.
I think you're supposed to have the intention not to do it again.
It's more like this. So let's say I make a concerted effort, right? That let's say, okay, I went to confession, I prayed for the Pope, I went to mass, I received the Eucharist that day, and I'm going to make a concerted effort today not to gossip. And that would be the requirement for a plenary indulgence for whoever my intention was for. And that's what I would say the intention that's for. Now, because when this priest was talking about intention for themselves, okay, but once you actually start having that attachment again or sin again, which we all do, that goes away. You no longer have that plenary indulgence, which is why it's better to do it for someone who's already passed. Yeah. But again, the still things apply that once I become attached to something again, I no longer am in a state where I can actually give or pray for a plenary indulgence for anybody.
So if this particular priest is getting one every day, he's going to confession every morning. Well,
he doesn't necessarily have to, because the sacrament of the Eucharist can remit of venial sin.
Yeah.
But he has to be detached from the temporal attachments. And that is sort of like, well, am I?
Well, one of the priests who's no longer a priest, I can't think of his name, was a big black. And I found out he hasn't been a priest. I was listening to some of his sermons or
Mhm.
whatever. And then I found out he hasn't been a priest for 13 years.
Mm.
But he said he has gotten into trouble with his bishop for refusing absolution. And he said if someone comes to him who's in an adulterous relationship and confesses it over and over, he says, it's my job as a priest to counsel him out of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So eventually he's gonna stop giving him
well, see,
absolution
that's
for him
not,
to
that's
go
not
back
what,
home.
that's not what the church teaches. So yes, the fathers well, okay, so first off, you never stop being a priest. You can stop functioning as a priest. And so when someone is laicized, that's what it means, that the bishop has taken the faculty away from the
Yeah,
person to do those things. So we'll be very clear about that first.
'cause-
But in the sacrament of confession, it is so again, the priest sits as the person of Jesus on the mercy seat. And so to withhold absolution from somebody is no small thing. To the point where I have to have a damn good reason to say that I cannot absolve you. And what that typically would come from is there is some indication within the sacrament that there's not a full contrition, there's not full satisfaction, or there's not a full confession. So what would that look like? Well, let's say I have someone in the confessional that maybe is in a circumstance where they're in an adulterous relationship. They don't want to be, but they keep on falling into that sin. Unless they tell me, oh, Father, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it again. Not that I don't want to do it again, it's just that I'm going to do this again. That would be grounds for me to say, well, that doesn't seem like that's contrite. And we have to have a deeper conversation about that.
mhm.
And I would even go as far as saying, are you sorry that you're not sorry for that? Because that's all you need is something there.
Mhm.
And then I could trust in the grace of the sacrament to hold that person would try to change their way and help counsel them to say, well, why do you have to maintain this relationship? What can we do to maybe or to change your ways or change your approach or remove you from this near occasion of sin? Now, if it's something like, well, I'm a divorce, I'm remarried civilly. Okay, my counsel will typically go to, well, can you live as a brother and sister with this woman and then come talk to me outside the confessional to talk about the process of annulment?
Mhm.
Or at least try to figure out a way that we can overcome this, right? Even if they say, well, Father, I don't know if I can, but I am sorry for this. And I don't want to, but I know that this may happen again. I know this may happen again. Not that I'm going to do it again, but it may. That's different in kind. And so barring someone tell me flat out, I'm going to do this again and I'm not sorry, there is no reason for me to withhold absolution. Even if there's legitimate concern and even probability that person would fall back in the same sin.
Yeah.
Because the intention at least has been communicated. I don't want to do this. I am sorry for doing it. And I'll at least kind of try not to do it again.
Well, someone very religious
Mhm.
told me, this was years ago, that he had an uncle that he very much admired because he divorced
Mhm.
and then he married another woman.
Mhm.
And the plan was, and it was okay with her because she was such a good woman, that he would confess and renounce the marriage on his deathbed.
Okay.
And I'm thinking golf course.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
you can plan it out great, right? Yeah, right.
I just said, if I were God, I would cure him,
Well, and see,
let him go home alone.
well, and that's funny too, because I've had family members, and this is how extreme I think it goes in the other way too. Like I've had family members who were divorced, not remarried, but divorced. And for a long time, they wouldn't come to receive the sacrament because, well, I'm divorced.
Mhm.
Well, the church doesn't teach that. The church teaches that if you're divorced, you should live as if you're still married. But sometimes divorce may be necessary on the circumstances. And so that should not keep you from receiving the sacraments, because the fact you're divorced isn't a sin. It's the fact that you're divorced and then you start engaging with someone else.
Mhm.
That's the
Yeah.
sin. I mean,
Yeah.
but see, that just goes to show there's this general lack of understanding what the church teaches these concepts. And so, but
he had a good understanding, and he was just gonna, pull one over on guys.
yeah, and I got a friend like that too, who's he's, I think God's working on him in some ways, but before I left Boeing, he was like, well, he was married to a Catholic girl, they were raising their children Catholic, and I was like, okay, great. It's like, well, I'm gonna go for the deathbed confession. I was like, well, that's a great plan if you know when it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But do you? I mean, you can go, you can walk outside a day, get hit by a car.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah.
Right. And then what I realized later was, oh, okay, my desire. That's my desire. Okay, maybe. But still, it's better to receive the sacrament.
Well, I was working for a Jewish man who I was just taking care of his affairs. He had Parkinson's, and I was getting his business affairs and things in order. And I'd only known him a couple of weeks, and he calls me on the phone and he begs me to come over, stop and get his medicine. And he's really halting and having trouble breathing. I said, I'll be right over. It is storming like crazy. And at the last minute, I grabbed my little dog, who's the best medicine. And so I rush over there, and he's frozen. That's what the medicine does, is loosen you up.
Oh, okay.
You'll freeze.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So I give him his medicine. Don't leave me. I said, we're not leaving. And Toby's already in the bed. I said, we're not leaving until you're fine. He says, oh, I love Catholic girls. They have such a sense of obligation. Well, later he told me that Jewish men do love Catholic girls, which I know, because I know some couples. And but he would talk about how not only do Jews rail with their fists against God, they try to bamboozle him at everything. And that's he told me about his father. They needed a fire in the fireplace for their Friday night. I don't know what they call it. So they had a what do they call it? Sabbath goy.
Yeah.
And I said, so Bob, if it is a sin for the Jews to light a fire, which turning on light switches is tantamount to lighting a fire, isn't it a sin for everybody? He says, yeah, but they didn't know it.
Yeah, that's what thing is. I mean, we had in our last year at seminary, we had a ecumenism and interreligious dialogue class. It was fascinating because we had different like rabbis and imams and different ministers come in and talk to us about their faith. And one thing that the rabbi, now again, obviously too, when it talks about Judaism, it's kind of the same thing as Protestantism. A lot depends on the rabbi, right? About what they're, so you have the Orthodox, you have the Reformed, you have like, the more kind of like, I can't remember what they call them now, but there's kind of these three levels. And so this particular rabbi was an Orthodox Jew, or at least maybe was middle, I don't know, but either way. But he still held to the teachings of the Torah and the prophets, and was very open to those things. And what he told us I thought was very interesting, it kind of shook me in a way, is that in order to be a practicing Jew, you don't even have to believe in God.
No, I know some who don't.
All you have to do is follow the law.
But they teach Hebrew.
Well, but what he said was all you have to do is follow the law.
Yeah.
The law becomes the God. And so as long as you're not eating shellfish, and as long as you're maintaining the kosher laws, and as long as you're going to synagogue on Friday and Saturday night, you don't just have to believe that God exists, but you have to do that. And this is regardless of whether you're Orthodox or, and so it was like, but there's just kind of, for me as a Catholic, there's like, well, there's a mental block there because why would you do all that stuff if you didn't believe?
Exactly.
That there's a God?
I've had discussion.
Yeah. And it was fascinating because I don't think I really had an answer to that.
Well, I think some of it has to do with tradition and nationality, but I said, you're praying.
Yeah.
They carry the Torah around.
Right.
I've been at services at CRC, and I mean, they're beautiful services. but I think of them as worship.
Well, of course.
But these are
Yeah.
people who teach.
Right, yeah.
They,
Right.
they're teaching, and then they go to Torah study. In fact, a friend died this last fall, and she was devout. She taught, and she was brilliant.
Mhm.
And she had what we had. She was given a faith that fit. She
Beautiful.
never, but she was very well aware of Christ, and
Mhm.
she was very well aware that we thought think he is, know he is the Messiah.
Mhm.
Well, when she died, I just kind of fell to pieces, and my prayer was, Jesus, she knows your Father
Yeah,
and
yeah.
is so devoted.
Sure.
She is going to be so thrilled.
Yeah.
And I do believe that,
I think there's
she wanted to know Christ and had
implicitly,
that
implicitly.
opportunity
Yeah.
to believe.
And that's what you teach things like baptism by desire, because the church agrees with you that people that don't necessarily know Christ, they would have that opportunity. And even at their moment of their death, they had that choice to say, "Oh, there he is." Just like the Old Testament figures in Sheol had the opportunity to say yes or no.
Mhm.
And then we call that baptism by desire, because the grace of baptism would still flow because of that implicit desire to see Jesus. So yeah.
Well, the one who says she's not sure there is a God, she grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and
Paul, I'm sorry, do you have any questions on?
I'll catch you next.
Okay,
You
all right, okay. All right, we'll see you.
Want to keep you too long,
Oh, that's fine.
She said the Gallagher kids next door, there were 6 of them, they were redheads, they were Catholic, they were a lot more fun. And so that's where she was.
Okay, yeah.
And she'd eat there and she'd play. She said, until somebody told me I had good health, then I'd run home crying.
Oh, boy.
But she loved that they had family rosary.
Oh, yeah.
So at 5 years old, she became a real devotee of the rosary. Then she decided to teach her family to say the rosary.
Wow.
And she said, because they were not practicing.
Sure.
She said, I think my sister Brenda went into Hebrew school the next Saturday. We decided they were remiss in their children's education.
Well, I mean, and good.
Yeah.
And good, right? I mean, yeah, right, of course.
But I said, Marion, you can always count on Mary, a good Jewish girl.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
You can always count on her. So she is, but I did have another question.
Yeah.
I should probably let you go. Even though I have a whole notebook.
Okay.
One of us in the rosary group
Mhm.
tears up, says every morning her extra prayers, and almost chokes up when she says, and let us pray for the parents and the babies who were alive yesterday and this morning and will not be alive tonight.
Mhm.
Now, what I want to tell her is those babies don't leave the hand of God.
Oh, sure, right, yeah.
That she says, let them know there's hope of heaven.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, I said, nobody who has never been exposed to the word. I said, most of them don't have ears.
Yeah.
Even if they have hearing, they don't have language.
Right, yeah.
So those.
So you're talking about like children in the womb we're talking about.
Yeah, we're talking about abortion.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
And, I mean, there are billions of natural abortions, if we're talking about just a couple cells.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so, no one even knew.
You mean like miscarriages, that kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, or they don't implant, you know, the
Oh, sure,
body doesn't always
Right,
work.
yep,
And, you know, people, I mean, women could lose 13 a month, a year
right, yeah.
regularly,
Mhm.
thinking, you know, it just isn't working. Okay, I want to assure her that those infants and babies, but you're also talking about car accidents. My parents lost their first baby at birth.
Oh,
He was
wow.
healthy.
Yeah,
She had preeclampsia, which is a high blood pressure thing.
right,
So I suppose the babies have strokes if
Oh.
they die.
okay, yeah,
And he was baptized after he was dead
good, yeah,
by a Jewish doctor, a
Okay.
Jewish
yeah.
hospital.
Mhm. Still applies,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard it said that they don't know when the soul leaves the body.
right, yeah.
But, you know, he is certainly innocent. But then, of course, in those days, there was limbo.
Well, there still is, the church still teaches that.
I thought they got rid of that.
No, but there's a level of understanding, so it really becomes more of a uh, more of a scholastic discussion than anything else. So in other words, like you probably won't hear too many people like preaching about it or like catechesis on it, just because, well, the guiding principle behind that is we trust in the mercy of God.
Mhm.
And so a child, especially that is, I mean, in the case of your brother, we would trust that God, of course, would bring that person, because even if they weren't baptized,
Mhm.
the intention was to have them baptized, and that
Oh, yeah.
intention would the desire would imply that, right?
And this doctor had permission, Cardinal
Either
Ritter,
way, either
but
right.
now I
Well,
find out anybody can an atheist
Yes,
can baptize.
exactly, and that's true. So what the church teaches that, you know, right now in canon law, for instance, it would say that, and we were taught this in the seminary, that really up to 2 hours after the death,
Oh,
you can
okay.
still baptize or apply the sacraments, because again, there's not the certainty of like when the soul leaves. So
Uh-huh.
we give the benefit of the doubt when it
Yeah.
comes to those things. Now that's a little different. Like I had somebody at a funeral ask me if I can anoint the body. I'm like, no. You know, I'll pray with you to bless the body, but I can't give a sacrament to someone not living, right? Yeah. So that was a little awkward conversation, but yeah, the church teaches that. But yeah, even children, when the parent willfully takes the child, we always want to trust in God's love and mercy, right? And so the question that kind of brought this about was, well, what in those circumstances, let's say there wasn't that intention, right, or there wasn't necessarily that thought behind it. Well, we would say that limbo, but also what is limbo? Limbo is still a state where there is complete fulfillment and natural fulfillment, right? So God is still present there and still connected to these children regardless. But a lot of that depends on the distinction or the disposition of the intention, right?
But still, they never had an opportunity to choose.
And that's why we say this is guided by God's mercy, right?
Yeah.
So we'd say that. So the real question is, are there any babies in limbo? Probably not, because God's mercy would endure, right?
Well, and of course, as a child, I was a little obsessed with the idea that my dad, you know, of course, he was pretty perfect, went straight to heaven, and he should have his son.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and he should have his father.
Sure. Yeah.
But then I thought, oh, this limbo thing, how do we get?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. In that circumstance you're
Yeah.
talking about, particularly, well, first off, we would say your brother is a saint, and your dad, we've done purgatory, you would be there anyway.
Kind of thing.
Right. So I think in those instances we say, well, that they're fine. There's good there. I think what the real issue with limbo comes in the fact is, like, let's say you do have those instances where you have like a willful abortion or something like that. Well, it seems like there's not that intention to receive Jesus in that life. And what clarifies that, I think, too, is one of the things I've had the privilege of serving in the Archdiocese is on the Respect Life Apostolate. And part of that is being part of the Rachel's Vineyard retreats they have for post-abortive women.
Mhm.
And part of those retreats is actually a prayer, and actually the kind of the intention, bringing about the intention for their children to be with God in heaven.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a beautiful action, because there is kind of an implicit baptism by desire happening there. That even if their babies weren't in heaven yet, that desire then brings them into it.
Well, one of the things that I heard on some discussion was that if you are aborting a baby, you do not have the right to ask for a, because that was the original prayer, and I
Right,
kind of
right.
put the kibosh on
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that parent would have a baptism of desire because you're extinguishing that.
Well, at least the child, would you say? Because, like I said, the child isn't innocent. They're not, I mean, even though they have original sin, and that's also kind of the issue too. Well, they still have original sin, yes, but there's an implicit desire to be baptized because of and so even an infant in the womb, if they are terminated, they still have the same option anyone else does if they see Jesus for who he is and can choose that.
Well, yeah, but if they're, a cluster of cells,
Yeah.
are they still, do they? I mean,
So again,
another thing I heard is they think that most people in heaven are 33 years old.
well, maybe. Well, that actually is posited by St. Thomas Aquinas, but he actually had two different thoughts. He originally thought it was the body or at 21, because he thought it was like the epitome of whatever of physicality. But then he changed his opinion and thought, well, maybe it was actually the age of 33, because that's when Jesus died. Now, for a baby that's born in the womb, does God have the ability to actually bring about the glorified body of that infant as 30? Of course he does. So could he? Sure. Would he? Maybe. But I think the whole discussion of limbo is kind of focused on kind of this understanding that, well, okay, if there were a case where there wasn't that implied, or implicit desire for baptism, where do those children go? Because it doesn't seem like they should go to that wouldn't be just to send them to hell, and it wouldn't necessarily be able to get in heaven. Limbo seems like a good place, because, well, they're at least fulfilling all their natural desire, and they're in God's arms in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if the parent, the person aborting,
Mhm.
is an atheist, never did plan to baptize that child, if that child had grown up to be 50 years old, might have baptized, had themselves baptized.
And God would certainly know that. And so in that respect, so again, we're talking about, okay, is there an instance where that couldn't have happened? And then would the actions of the parents be applied to those children? Well, no. So in other words, God would not damn that innocent to hell, but also would they be eligible to receive the glory of heaven? Well,
why not?
I think that's what the church says. Well, why not? Because the thing, like I said, the understanding is God's mercy would endure. Now, but there has to be a choice, even by these lump of cells, as you call them, or this child, to receive that. So would there be a case where this germination of humanity could not? Maybe.
Well,
I don't know, right?
No, that's another thing I don't quite get, why, if the angels knew what hell was, they would just not swallow their pride.
Yeah.
And hang around and just behave themselves.
I mean, and that's what I think that's also one of the tragedies of the angelic natures, the fallen angels, is just like in Adam and Eve, they fully knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing about it.
Oh, I got a whole page on Adam and Eve.
Here's the other thing to consider too when it comes, and this is actually it's actually in the readings in the Gospel tomorrow. Kind of talk about angelic nature, and but the love of God, and this kind of maybe fits into the discussion we're having about limbo. The love and mercy of God is so enduring that God, when these angels made those decisions for all eternity, he could have just annihilated them.
Yeah.
But he didn't. Which shows that he still loves them. And so what I was thinking about this today as I was thinking about a homily. what that kind of means is, I think we see that a lot in our own natural lives. Like, there's a lot of people I think that we consider to be our, or at least we consider us to be their enemy. But we don't necessarily, we still would love them in the midst of it. So we see
Yeah.
it in families, right? So we have these political divides, these things happen. I don't like my family all the time, but I always love them. And I think that's the same love that God has for those fallen angels. It's just so the problem with the fallen angels, they can't repent. They can't turn back to God.
But I don't know, I heard there's something called universalism that says everybody's gonna be in heaven.
Yeah, that's that. The church does not support that. That is not a teaching of the church. Because so here's the thing. What we talk about is we hope that there's nobody in hell. But I can't say that for sure.
Well, when we were children, we were told if you go fishing with your grandpa and don't go to mass and die on the way home, that you go to hell.
And again, for a little child, if you're trying to instill this understanding of, like, you know, the rules, let's say, right, to live a moral life, that can be very effective. And the thought is that you would grow in your understanding of the faith and realize, like, okay, well, it's not that I'm going to spend time with my grandpa, because maybe my grandpa is suffering from dementia, and he finds a lot of comfort and healing in fishing and being with him in those moments. I can't abandon him to go to mass. There's a good in that, to the point where maybe I'd be exempt from my obligation to go to mass that day.
Yeah, except if your grandpa's 45 years old,
Fair,
just love to
fair.
go fishing at
But
5 in the
But
morning.
again, there's differences in those understanding. And for a little child, you have to put it in black and white so they can understand, look, this is a big
It's
deal.
scary.
It's
Yeah.
a big deal. And there is a level of, there may be better ways of providing that, sure. But children are pretty black and white. And it's like, look, if you don't go to mass on Sunday willfully, you're going to hell. Well, what are some examples of that? Well, okay, I can't necessarily give you every scenario, because first of all, your head may spin, and because you're this old, you won't necessarily receive it all. But maybe for now, it's best to say, well, yeah, you know, let's say if you go to the movies on Sunday morning instead of going to mass, yeah, that would be good, right? Because you go to the movies later.
Now, Father Monsignor Schemleffer gave a homily and said directly to the kids. And he wasn't threatening about it, but he said, how many of you come up and play in the schoolyard, but you don't come to mass?
I've said that sometimes with kids too, yeah.
But coming up there means they could go by themselves.
Exactly. Well, and see,
But then they go to, how many go to communion like this?
Very
during
rarely
the week.
any of them, none of them, really.
And so then,
So that point, and here's where, oh boy, and this is kind of I've talked to other brother priests about this same scenario, and it's difficult because is it, and this is always, you always want to charitably assume these things. If I'm, let's say, a 5th grader, even a 6th grader, and my parents tell me, I don't want you to go into any buildings alone. Okay, well, the church is a building, but they said, well, you can go up and play outside, you can go play up at the, you know, if they tell them they can do that, they're trying to obey their parents. Now you can say, well, wait a minute, there's also the 3rd commandment, so shouldn't you know that you should go to mass even if it's by yourself?
yeah.
Okay, but also they have to maintain the 4th commandment too. And so if for their own safety, their parents are putting this out there, which is a good. Does that then remit them from the obligation to go to mass? In a way, it does. Now you could say, well, why aren't your parents taking you that?
Yeah.
But that's not on the child, that's on the parents. Now, I think that argument becomes less of a potency, because as you grow older, if you're a 7th and 8th grader and you're coming here playing basketball while mass is going on, you're not going to mass on Sunday, that's more on you, I'd say.
Well, and they also, you know, go to Panera and
exactly
wreak havoc.
And see, and that's the other thing too. So even then you're saying, well, but I can't necessarily say for sure what's happening within the family unit to say, you guys go all these other places, but don't go to.
Yeah.
Part of it is there's an intellectual dissonance, I think, with children especially. They don't necessarily see that connection. And so that's what I think Monsignor and I are trying to do, is saying, well, so what's this all about?
Yeah, because I think that, yeah, once they're teenagers,
Right.
you've lost them.
But for those younger kids, is that a sin for them? I can't say it is. Maybe a
Yeah.
sin for their parents.
Yeah, and you know, I always hesitate to say in my day, but we had a children's mass.
Mhm.
And if your parent wasn't with you, you sat with your class where the sister was
Yeah,
there.
right, right.
Well, my dad brought us, mom stayed home with the baby. It was probably her finest hour, because she would go to 7, come home, and then we'd be gone. But we just were used to it.
Yeah, I know.
By the time we had our own agency
Right,
and,
right.
know.
And I think for most, like, I know from my upbringing, that was instilled very deeply, that even if you're going to mass regardless,
Yeah.
unless you're dying, you're going to mass.
And as far as going into a building alone, you're going into a building with a lot of people you know.
Well, yeah, but
Because you're in a neighborhood.
see, that's what I'm saying. I think there can be maybe a dissonance there,
Yeah,
where wouldn't necessarily be sinful for the child,
yeah,
and even for the parent. I mean, because that could also be like a lack of, again, if the parent's not doing it, you can say, well, why aren't you doing it? And what reasons are you not?
yeah.
And that's why it's very difficult, because I can't say even the parents are sinning, because I don't know.
Well,
Maybe now, maybe, you know, because I like, for instance, I have a sister who works in a hospital for 12 hours a day on Sunday.
yeah,
And now she's fortunate enough that they have services provided during the day, but right now they don't have a chaplain, so they're not providing that.
mhm,
So because she's going to work at a time where she's exempt,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now, I know we have a lot of medical people working in this parish. Are they all in that sort of situation? I don't know.
And,
Maybe.
you know, can they not go on Saturday or,
Maybe not. 'Cause I mean, my sister works on Saturday and Sunday.
yeah, so she's busy doing God's work.
Mhm, mhm.
And, but, you know, there are families that just sleep late and make pancakes.
I
and-
know there are. And again, I can only say, well, here's our obligation, here's why. And
Yeah,
what I try to find, what I try
Yeah.
to do with these older, especially the older kids and with the adults, there's a switch from the understanding of you have to do this and here's why, to here's why you should want to.
yeah, yeah,
And because really you're starting to get away from the rigidity of the obligation, and more towards, well, here's the benefit you receive in it.
uh-huh,
And I think when you put it that way, that actually is a good argument. But again, that has to be received and accepted. And when are you receiving that or accepting it? Well, at mass. And if you're not going to mass, well, then when are you? Or if you're not coming to bother the Father, or I don't know, right?
I love being at mass with children,
Mhm.
and I love this.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Well, you're giving them a little exercise,
Yeah.
thing,
Okay.
and, but then the 4th and 5th graders,
See, and that's, and
it's
again,
not cool.
I know, and see, and that's why I think that hallelujah, that does apply for the younger kids. I can see the benefit there.
Yeah,
I think we'll see with the older kids though, you have to do
oh,
something
it's not
different.
cool.
No, you have to do something. The maturity level needs to reach
Yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's all, that's really kind
And
of.
if they were super mature, they'd be doing it.
Well,
Right.
well, see, I disagree.
It's just not
I
cool.
actually think that actually is a sign of spiritual maturity. You say, I don't need this anymore.
Well,
Right.
I think they don't do it because it would look silly, because their
I
friends are
think
doing
I think
it.
it's probably a generality what it is, but
Yeah.
also too, like, I can
Well,
also
no, they
see,
don't
I can
need
see the argument saying, like, why am I doing this?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I can understand that discussion too.
But with the little kids, well, it's participation
Yes,
for one thing.
Right.
And I just love, I have a few of my favorites. The little guy with his hands in his pockets. And, you know, I'm kind of glad that I sit up front because then I'm not
Yeah.
watching all of
yeah. Well, it's not all of them either.
No,
It's not all of them, yeah.
but some of them.
Right, yeah.
But I love the teachers. This one last year, she would kneel and she would hook her toes up on the pew.
Oh.
And the teacher would just tap her on the waist. she straighten up
Oh.
and, but the one teacher who snaps her fingers to get them to genuflect. She gets them lined up. and
Oh,
she
yeah.
Snaps her
Yep, yep,
fingers.
yep, yep, yep.
I don't know anybody's name.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Down they go and up,
Yep, yep.
off they go.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty efficient.
Yeah,
but,
you got it pretty good. That's a third grade teacher, got it pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know, they seem happy,
Yeah.
you know, and.
But no, that's a big, and that's not just an issue here, I think it's in Gabriel, I think every place I've been has a school. The big discussion is how do we get more of the school families coming to Mass? And like, for instance, here, St. Gabriel, so we have a big school, and it's more, I think it's more noticeable in that respect. But the thing you also consider too is a third of our school families don't live inside the boundary. So, okay, well, maybe that's about 150 kids, let's say. Well, then they probably, you think they're going to their own parish somewhere else, maybe. About a
Thank
third,
God.
well, about a third of the families that are in this, so another third would come,
Yeah,
right? And so that leaves a third that then you start charitably assuming, well, maybe they're going to another parish, maybe that, because I mean, that's true too. After the pandemic, there's a lot of people going to Epiphany, and a lot of people going to Specklin or Joan of Arc, maybe.
that's true.
But then you also wonder, well, why aren't they coming? If they live here, why aren't they coming here?
Yeah,
And my approach is, I don't care as long as you're going somewhere.
yeah.
But then you start talking to some of the kids, and you realize, well, a lot of them aren't. And so it's like, okay, so where's the disconnect here? And that's a question that every pastor, and I think every priest that has a school, they ask that. And part of that is, I mean, part of the solution, and this isn't all the solution, but really it has to start, well, why is it not a priority for you in your home? And if it's not a priority in your home, it doesn't matter what I say or what we do here.
That's what the Monsignor said. He said, why don't you ask your parents? We can all go as a family. Well, maybe that would work.
Well, I will tell you that if someone confesses, a child confesses that in the confessional, my counsel typically is, why don't you ask for parents just to take you? Because maybe that's the best you can do.
Or maybe you can go with your grandma.
Right, or if that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do. And if parents say no, well, all right, at least you tried, and that wouldn't be simple for you.
Yeah.
But also too, it engages the parents to kind of look deeper. And I do know that there's certain families that come back to me. I've won a conversation in particular after I first got here, and I don't know when I said this or what I said, but this person was like, yeah, you're telling my kids they should go to Mass. I'm like, yeah. It's like, yeah, we're starting to go. I'm like, okay.
Oh, good.
So good.
Smile about it.
It was like, it was a fun interplay, and I get it, but it was just like, all right, so what's the problem?
Yeah, well, smile, that's my job.
Well, and I think some people take that, and some of the arguments that come down from other people is, you have some families that aren't Catholic, and so are you proselytizing? And my response to that is, I don't care. If they're sending their child here, they should expect to have a Catholic education.
Yeah.
And so it's not my job to say, well, let me temper my homily to accommodate your understanding of the faith.
Yeah.
My job is to teach you the Catholic faith. And it's up to you to decide if it's true or not and go with it. I'm not gonna force you to be baptized or force you to Mass or whatever, but I'm going to present it to you. And it's up to you to decide what you should do.
Well, and I know people with parishes that are doomed, like mine. Nobody's willing to admit it, but St. James the Greater does not have a Mass every day.
Really?
I think it's Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays and Sunday.
That must have changed recently. Within the last maybe 5 years or so.
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
the last few years. It's not real recently,
Okay.
but well, they raised like $300,000 to keep school open one more year, and somebody matched it, I think.
Do you know I was there when that all went down? I was assigned as a seminarian there.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
So Father
I wasn't going.
Well, Father Quang Van was there together in Vietnam. We were there together for a year.
Okay.
And that's right when they were deciding to close school, and that's when the money was raised. And so I was there through all that.
But then I think they didn't have any kids.
Oh, no,
So-
they only had 90 kids in the school,
Yeah, so you couldn't keep doing that because it's not a,
right?
but that parish, the new school. It opened the year I started. We came back into the neighborhood when I was in 4th grade.
Okay,
And that was the first year of the new school that smelled new till I was
Gotcha.
gone.
gotcha.
And that's my dad's parish.
Okay.
And, my mom's father was on the building commission of
Oh,
the
wow.
archdiocese, and they
Okay.
paid cash for that school,
Wow,
the parish.
yeah,
And my grandpa said to my mom, that will be the last year that anyone in the archdiocese pays for terrazzo floors. You can't,
that's
you
true.
can't.
I know,
find a
it's
more
hard, yeah,
expensive
right, that's
floor
very true, yeah.
than terrazzo. And, but when they built the first school and the church, my mom said she was at my dad's mother's house, and, well, this must have been, they were building something else. And Father O'Connor, who is legend.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah.
Well, he was my grandma's best friend.
Okay, all right.
And she hears something in the dining room. She knows she's the only one in the house. Well, he had come in. There's a drawer where the men, my dad and his brothers, they had to put $4 a week in there from their paycheck.
Okay.
And he had come in to get the money, and he's going through the mail. But he showed up on the porch one day, and he's making a big commotion. And so Graham goes to the door. He says, Nellie, this is my rocking chair. It's not good enough for the new rectory. And he puts it down in the living room. And she died in it. She died in that chair. It was one of those wooden rocking chairs with the tapestry.
Oh, yeah.
And she had his chalice case too, which was actually a table
Oh,
with a drawer in
kid,
it.
yeah.
And, but he would call her, come on down here, answer the phone. But he didn't have a car. So he'd go out on the street, and the first parishioner who went by had to drive him to wherever he had to go on a stick call. He had Irish setters that the whole neighborhood was afraid of. They just ran rampant through the neighborhood.
The nice thing about that parish sign is that we, like, Father Kwong and I, whenever we would take communion and we would walk around the neighborhood because it was
Yeah.
just really to walk. It was like great. That church, I love that church. It's a beautiful church.
Well, the tapestry.
Yeah.
It was estimated by the art museum as priceless,
Wow.
and they took care of it. They
Yeah.
took care of it for the church. I guess they still do.
I don't know, but that is, I
What?
love that is a beautiful tapestry.
What? Well, you know what? I mean, did you do any weddings? Did you see any wedding pictures?
No, I never. We were
Well, you know how dull it is.
Yeah.
In pictures, it glows. It was
I just
made that
I
way.
just think it was very the depictions of the all the saints was beautiful. I thought it was very, and it really kind of direct your eyes.
And the altar, when we were children, had kind of a glimmer to it, the walls.
Yeah.
And the diamond shapes with the fleur-de-lis.
Right.
The fleur-de-lis were in gold, and I think so were the diamond
Yep.
shapes, and it was kind of a peachy color.
Yeah.
Well, then it went to something like St. Gabe's, where it was painted beautifully.
Yeah.
Now it's beige.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just not money.
That's true, and I mean that's what I'm saying. That is a factor when it comes to a lot of these parishes. But I mean, it's funny. I'll divulge this because why not? I was asked to do some analysis for one of the planning areas for All Things New. So I've taken some of the feedback and kind of make some analysis about like what's being said, what the gist of these things are, and and that's something that comes through quite a bit. A lot of people, when it comes to these mergers, not necessarily concerned about merging with these other communities. It's, well, what's going to happen to the church? What's going to happen to the school? And That is a valid concern, I think, for a lot of people, and I think especially in rural areas, there may be an argument to say, well, maybe we should keep some of these churches open in these areas because they're so large.
Mhm.
In the city, I mean, I think part of the argument is like the historical value for a lot of these places. I mean, could you use like, can you open up like keep a few open as like a chapel and have mass there once a week or whatever? That's gonna be some determination, I think, gonna be made by the archbishop, and I mean, I can see the argument in doing that.
But just the expense of the plant.
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, so if you think about that, it's not keeping everyone open, but you can keep
Just
some of
St.
these,
James.
right? You know, and so maybe you can do that and then sell off the other properties and use the money from that to fuel the maintenance costs, or whatever, for these other places. I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
Well, isn't Holy Innocents an architectural firm now?
Oh no, last time I
Kings
heard,
Highway?
I think it was still like a non-denominational church.
Oh,
Yeah, I think I remember who's in there. Is it like the Gathering or something? I don't know. But there is it turned into a non-denominational church. I think it still is. Last time I drove by there, I think it still was. So, but again, I mean, if you look at that place, it's beautiful from I mean, the outside is like, wow, this is a gorgeous place.
Yeah,
And you can tell it's a Catholic church.
yeah,
You know, it's not being used
yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
And so yeah, I think there's some value in maybe make those determinations. And I mean, not every church and every school, but I think it's would not even wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be too bad to maybe keep 2 or 3 open in a particular parish.
Are you old enough to remember Telena's on Skinker? The pizza place?
No. I mean, maybe in my generation, I don't think I've ever been there.
Well, it had the stained glass windows, I think about St. Anne's or something, but they were stained glass windows with saints.
Oh,
And they built wooden boxes painted brown behind them, and I guess maybe at one point they had lights, but now all they had was dust.
oh.
Well, that was a sacrilege.
Hmm.
Just the very thought of them being in a stinky pizza place.
Yeah.
But they did have wonderful sales.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of see that argument when it comes to what was the church up in North Liguori? And you know, that was a skate park. I mean, you know, when we look at it, they turned church into a skate. Obviously, it's be consecrated. They took all the sacred things out.
Yeah,
but it's also like you can walk in here like
never-
this used to be a church. This is a church. And I don't think you want to see that happen in a lot of places. So
No.
my thought would be, if you're not going to, I guess I would rather see, if you're not going to use it as a Catholic church, just knock it down. Right.
Not
But-
until I die.
But you know, like, well, but I think part of that depends. Like, if you see, like, my home parish in Macklin and Mary. Look, I have a lot of connection there.
Where is that exactly?
It's over on Blow Street. It's like just a block south of Conrad Park.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I grew up in that neighborhood. That's where I served my first communion, my first confession. I had confirmation there. I had my first mass there. I mean, so there's a lot of connection
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
But also, I can understand turning that into something else, because there's not as much beauty in that building as there is like at a St. Gabriel or at a St. James. And so you could convert that very easily into something else and still say, okay, this would work in this scenario.
Well,
more of a modern
one of
building.
the things that concerns me is there are old people who walk.
Yes. And so part of that is, as a pastor of these new places, is how do you be creative in accommodating those things?
Well, I think maybe the archdiocese has to use some of the money they save
Well,
and just
You could look at a rideshare program. Yeah,
send a bus
I think
around
there's
to
ways, I
every.
think there's ways you can do that, right? And that could be a solution. And that's why it's gonna be up to the new pastors of these parishes to make those determinations.
And at St. James, my Graham died when I was 4.
Mm.
When I was 30, there were people who still said, "Aren't you Nellie Finn?" That was her maiden name. Granddaughter. You know, now the church, you know, it's very different now.
Yeah.
But everybody grew up
Yeah.
and stayed there.
Right.
And you know, you can't bring that back, but
But you could also look at, well, could there potentially be in the future, if we're talking about the future of the archdiocese and how it works, could there be potentially a shift back into these neighborhoods from these other places? Now, I think a lot has to happen for that to happen. that is outside the jurisdiction of the archdiocese.
You have to be rich. to
Well,
move back into
I would think also,
Dogtown.
I would say even like, you probably have to look at like crime solutions that are going on too, and other
Yeah.
situations that are happening more politically in the political sphere. But also too, what's kind of fascinating, this is a question I have, and I don't necessarily I haven't had an answer for this, but you know, there's been a lot of redevelopment, especially like in the Hill neighborhood,
Yeah,
down in Soulard, and now there's actually a plan apparently on the riverfront there around where Mary Queen of Victories is, to
mhm.
do some commercial areas over there. And, you know, we keep on seeing the decline of the population of these people in St. Louis. You kind of wonder, who are they building these things for?
Well, Dogtown is in some ways becoming kind of gentrified,
Yeah.
but are they Catholic?
Well, also, can they afford it? I mean,
And do they have 6 kids?
well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I think the thing about it is could there potentially be a shift back? Maybe. Who knows what's going to happen in 50, 25, 50, 100 years.
Mhm.
So it would be prudent to maybe keep some of these places open still, to maybe have that hope. Now, you don't want to put everything on a hope. There's some practicality to that, but I think it could make sense to do that. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot has to happen for that to actually be a reality.
Now, I heard that there are going to be either 79 closed doors or 79 churches.
Well, if you look at the boundaries that have been set, so all that's out there on the All Things New webpage, they kind of look at all the different, they put all the plans out there, what they're going to do.
Yeah,
So like, for instance, like here in our planning area, which actually includes, it's the western portion of the deanery as well as the churches that feed into Holy Cross.
yeah.
Of those, I think it's like 20 parishes. I think it's going down to like 5 or 6. So that's a huge reduction.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean it's gonna go down to 5 or 6 churches. I don't know. I think one of the things, and people might be upset with me about this, I don't know. I don't know for sure. But I think a lot of people around here are assuming that St. Gabriel is going to be the site for our particular
I would think so.
boundary. Well, maybe.
Well, you've got so many children.
Okay, but the problem we run into here is if we take any more. We have a big
How big
church.
are the classrooms? How big are the class? How many kids in the
Right
class?
now, I think on average, we have about 20, 25 kids per class.
Mm.
But the problem is we don't have any more classroom
Closers.
space, right?
We were 30, 35.
Well, again,
And two.
right, and so, but doing that now with lay
Yeah,
people, you have to
yeah,
pay them
can't
for
do
that,
that
and so,
anymore.
so it's one of those things where, okay, well, could we potentially build? Well, we don't have any room, can we build up? Well, we have a lot of sinkholes that open up around here, and that would indicate to me that the foundation isn't
Yeah,
probably
one
the
opened under
spot,
my house. Yeah.
right? So I don't know if we want to build up, I don't know if the foundation can handle that.
Yeah.
So where of these parishes we're looking to combine with, what would also be centrally located? Where are the extreme western portion of that parish boundary? Well, now again, don't get angry with me. This is just, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I have no idea. But if I'm looking at this from the perspective of an engineer,
Mhm. What kind of engineering?
mechanical,
I used
But-
to work for a mechanical engineer.
right? Well, yeah, about 10 years of Boeing. But if I'm looking at these areas, I'm saying, well, what has the most potential? And if it were me, if I were the Archbishop, again, I'm not saying this, Gab, I'm sorry if anyone's upset. I would sell Magdalene. I would, and this is where I kind of say, I would probably sell here. Because this is prime real estate. I would get a lot of income for this place. I would then take all that money, put it either into Sorrows, where it has a beautiful church.
It does.
Now, the
It's huge.
problem there is you're also limited on space to build. But if I really was looking at like potentiality, the best potential, Rayfields. I would expand
I've
that
never
church,
been there.
I would expand that school out, because they have all that parking lot space.
Mhm.
I would knock down that church, build a bigger church. And hopefully a beautiful church,
But
and
you're
I would-
talking about
and I would
knocking
consolidate over
somebody's
there.
church down.
What was that?
But you're still talking about knocking
Yeah,
somebody's
but I
church
don't,
down.
and again, don't get rid of,
Well, if you
I don't
do
I don't know if anyone would this right
If
field,
the Archbishop hears that and decides to do it, move to James. over to their
Well, you know,
property.
that's
Move.
that's done for, they actually know what you're, so I mean,
Yeah, that would only cost about 4 times as much as building a new church.
but I mean,
Please take the damn.
I'm just looking at that in this, from this perspective and again, we're taking all the emotional detachment out of it. If I'm looking at this purely a potentiality issue, I would say, okay, I would probably sell Magdalen, I would sell here, I would sell Sorrows, and I would put it all into Rayfields, expand the school, build a new church, and that would be my centrally located facility. Now, granted, I don't know if that's gonna happen, I don't think it's gonna happen, but
Remember when I told you that after Vatican II, when the sisters wore shorter skirts, people wanted to leave the church?
right.
Well, I think you'd get rid of even more.
I mean, I don't doubt that. And again, that has to be taken into consideration. I'm saying just for a purely practical.
Hopefully people are getting
Objective
bored and have
standpoint.
turned this off.
Yeah,
before-
probably. After 2 hours, maybe. But I want to be clear, I'm just talking from a purely practical standpoint. I'm not talking about anything
Yeah,
else.
well, that's the problem with engineers.
Right, I know, you're right. And again, I mean, you
You can make them holier. but
and
you can't
that's
make
also
them engineers.
why I'm not the Archbishop, because I know those other things we can take into consideration, and I know they will be. But I'm just saying this, if I'm looking at this from 10,000 foot high, and I'm saying, well, what I would do is just,
Mhm.
I'm just saying.
You better be careful, you're not gonna get to be 10,000 foot high.
Oh, let's pray that never happens.
No. we're gonna-
Let's pray that never, I don't want that job, that's for sure.
No, I didn't mean that.
Okay.
No.
When I'm being dropped into the plane.
No, I meant heaven.
No.
You get too many old ladies.
That'd be,
Yeah,
I'll take that, I'll be a martyr, that's fine with me, I'll take it, you know.
No, you get too many old ladies.
Well, I think that's probably enough for tonight.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I do still have a couple more pages, but.
We definitely have a time next week, so that's